This presentation focuses on the role of a web application I have been developing called News on Atlas and its impact on students' level of news literacy and international mindedness. The main page on the News on Atlas website is an Atlas template which accepts live RSS news feeds for most countries in the world. This means that the user can easily access news pertaining to a country simply by hovering over or clicking on the country displayed on the Atlas. When the user hovers their cursor over a country on the Atlas, a dynamic newsfeed window appears over the country, and this window disappears when the user hovers away from the country. If the user wants the newsfeed window to remain static but movable, the user just needs to click on the country. In either case, the user can scroll through news headlines from multiple sources. In this way, the student can choose two news articles from different publishers to compare in instances where the same news story is covered. Put simply, news literacy is a specific type of information and digital literacy that focuses on sorting fact from fiction in news articles. This means that students need to question what it is they are reading, asking who created a piece of news, for what purpose, and to look at whether or not the news report is biased. David Buckingham sums up the importance of the media by stating that it is at the core of our experience, at the heart of our capacity or incapacity to make sense of the world. Interestingly, despite the popularity of media education in recent years, Paul Mihailidis has identified that few scholars have used the term media literacy to explore the news as the focus of their scholarship, and yet he makes the case that journalism is fundamental to democracy, since it is the duty of the news to provide their readers with essential and well-reported information. Democracy implies that citizens should have an adequate amount of information to make informed choices. According to Tewksbury and Rittenberg, information and the technology of its control form a central pillar of power in a democratic society. In this light, News on Atlas potentially serves an important function. In the school context at least, it can make students more news literate about current affairs related to their subject of study. I expect News on Atlas to facilitate such news literacy by providing a one-stop access point to pre-selected but customizable news feeds from well-established publishers. Each RSS feed links to a news source which is generally considered to be reliable for statements of fact. The built-in news feeds include, but are not limited to, The Guardian, the BBC and New York Times, each of which is subject to strict editorial practices. From my own observations, the current practice for most students when doing a piece of research online is to simply run a Google search and to generally not go beyond the first few search hits. This is a problem widely recognised in the literature on digital literacy too, which tends to show that the more difficult it is for students to find information, the less likely they are to seek it out. Part of my rationale for designing this courseware, then, is to minimise the barriers of good news literacy online, which can be viewed in terms of the cognitive load of finding reliable news online. By overlaying news feeds on an atlas, it makes it easy to see and access high-quality news according to the country to which it belongs. Based on my literature review, which is about digital news literacy, I want to assess the contribution that News on Atlas can make to students' knowledge of current worldwide news, which is relevant to their subject of study. Are students more knowledgeable about current events related to their subject of study as a result of using News on Atlas? I intend to conduct my pilot study with students studying for an IB in Information Technology in a Global Society, which is 14 students studying 6 45-minute sessions per week. One of the overall objectives of this course is for students to improve their knowledge of IT developments around the world. Prior to exposing the students to this application, two research methods will be applied. Firstly, students will need to complete a blank map template and label as many countries as they can identify on the map. Secondly, students will need to complete a questionnaire that I have prepared in anticipation of a subsequent focus interview. The questionnaire will include all of the interview questions that I will ask related to students' news literacy, including what the students consider news to be, how often they check news related to IT, and what they consider makes something newsworthy. The follow-up focus interview will be conducted with 4 of the students. I will then present these students with 10 news stories and ask them to pick just 3 that they think are the most newsworthy, recording their responses. All students will then be given the task to familiarise themselves with News on Atlas and to become members on the site. After students have been using News on Atlas for a week, all students will need to complete another blank Atlas template, labelling as many countries as they can identify. I will then conduct individual interviews with my 4 focus students. In addition to the focus group questions I asked before, I will also ask each student to explain why they chose the RSS news feeds that they did and how valuable they found News on Atlas to be as a tool for their own learning. This concludes my presentation about News on Atlas and how I intend to conduct a pilot study of its effectiveness for improving students' level of news literacy and international mindedness.